So in this lesson, we're going to talk about interviewing and specifically some of the key aspects that we associate with formal interviews today, along with some strategies that can help you be successful with the interview process. So to begin, let's talk about some of the different types of interviews that we may experience today. Truly, there's three different overarching types of interviews. We have phone interviews, virtual interviews like Zoom or Teams or Skype interviews, along with on-site or truly in-person interviews where you will be going to the facility, the organization that you'd be working at. Now, while these are the overall types of interviews that you might encounter, there's different stages of interviewing as well. So we may have a screening interview. Especially for more formal or professional positions, we'll have several different stages of interviewing. And the initial one, which is typically about 20 to 30 minutes, is going to be what's called a screening interview, where they might have a large candidate pool that they're working to narrow down, and so they conduct an initial set of interviews. Now, afterwards, or even during the screening interview, we may have what's called a one-on-one interview versus a panel interview. One-on-one is like it sounds when you're going to be interviewing with someone directly, typically the hiring manager for the position, versus a panel interview will have several different people involved that are going to have a stake in the hiring decision. So that could be anyone from the hiring manager, different representatives that are in similar roles to you, possibly someone from a related department, or even someone involved in HR sometimes. And then we'll have sometimes what's called a peer group interview. This may be part of a more formal interview, an on-site extended interview, like one of the last phases of interviewing, where maybe you'll have a panel interview with the hiring manager and the key truly hiring team, but then go to a peer group interview where you get to know people that you'll be working with directly on a day-to-day basis. And during this interview, it's truly important to show that you're approachable, you're friendly, you're a team player, you're someone who will fit into that company culture. And then finally, for, again, more formal positions, sometimes we'll have what's called a luncheon interview, where this could occur over lunch or dinner, but essentially it's still being interviewed while you're having a meal together. So you may go out for lunch or dinner, but you are still, even if you aren't being asked formal interview questions, you're still within the interview process, where you're still being really examined in relation to whether you're the best fit for the position that you're applying to. Now, when we're thinking about getting started with interviewing and how we might prepare before we even get to the point of either going online to conduct that interview or walking in the door, one of the first things that's important is to get organized. And much of this is what we're doing in our class now, where you actually prepare materials that you're going to need to be successful with the interview. So that could include your resume, your cover letter, any documents, a formal application that you might need to submit to help receive the actual interview. Once you get the interview, one of the first things you're going to want to do is start to do your research. And so by this, I mean companies today will often ask, tell us what you know about our company. And to be able to answer that question beyond just vague, generalized statements, you have to do your research. So looking at maybe what sets a specific company apart from their competition, or looking at what they might be best known for. If they've been in the news recently, or they have a big initiative, is there something like that you want to highlight in your interview responses? And then even looking deeply into the company culture or their values. What are they promoting on their website? Can you go to Glassdoor and see what people are saying about that company? Doing additional research is really key to helping you stand apart from other people who will be interviewing for the same position. It's also going to allow you to move beyond just robotic, vague answers to more of a conversation where you can talk about what you learned and incorporate that into how you would be the best fit for that position. Now, finally, if possible, it's ideal to network. And so by this, I mean, is there anyone you know, or anyone you know who may know, someone who works for that organization? And if possible, it's ideal to reach out and get some inside information. So what is the company culture like? What are big initiatives right now? What are some of the key values you could promote? So if possible, it's always great to reach out to your contacts and see if you can gain any more insight to the company before you set foot in that interview. And then last but not least, practice. The more you practice, the more comfortable you are going to feel in the interview. Even if you feel incredibly comfortable and you've been practicing for a while, interviews are different every single time you experience one. And so the more you practice, the more variety of experiences you're going to gain, and that's only going to help you ultimately be prepared. All right, let's talk about dressing for the interview. So truly, the standard rule, because we have a wide variety of expectations today based on the industry, the position, and even just the everyday responsibilities that you might encounter and what your role might look like. The best rule of thumb is to dress what is suitable for that specific position and industry and looking in a more formal manner, okay? So whatever you would expect to be formal or be accepted as formal within that industry is what you want to show up for in the interview. Now, another good rule of thumb is dressing for the job you want and not the job you currently have. You're all striving to go into a certain profession. What is going to be expected in that area? And then dress accordingly. So things that we might want to commonly avoid across the boards, even though dress apparel may differ based on your job, some common things to avoid could include flashy jewelry or too much cologne or perfume. You don't want to do things that are going to cause attention to you in a negative way or distract from the powerful ideas that you're going to be sharing in your interview responses. You want someone to focus on you and not necessarily what you're wearing in a negative way. All right, now that kind of leads into first impressions. First impressions when you go to an interview are made within the first 90 seconds of you beginning that interview and walking in the door. Now that includes the greeting, which is a huge part of showing that you're confident and that you're eager and enthusiastic about being there. They want to hire someone who has that you attitude, that you're going to be a go-getter and fit into that company culture. So immediately making eye contact, having a friendly professional greeting, shaking hands when it's appropriate, and showing confidence is really key to being successful. And again, this is a key part of where practice helps us work through some of this and feel confident in doing these steps. Now, my other suggestion is to truly allow the interviewer to guide you through the process. Let them show you where the interview is going to be conducted. Let them show you what might be the next things to talk about. Don't try to dominate the conversation, but be professional and still engaged at the same time. Okay, so what are some common things you might encounter in an interview in terms of questions? I've got a list on this slide of some of the most common interview questions that occur today. Everything from some more general ones to specific ones. So tell me about yourself, all the way to what's your greatest strength. Now, the key thing when we look at any one of these questions, what is someone really asking you? They essentially want to know a little bit more about who you personally are, why you're interested in the specific position you applied to, what you can do for that specific company, and what sets you apart from other people who are applying for the job. So in your interview responses, every single response should connect you to the position, to the company, and really showing how you can fill the needs of the position that they're hiring for. To help you prepare for the variety of questions that you may encounter, because it's not going to be possible to know every single question or to think of a response and memorize a ton for all the variety of interview questions that may occur today. But instead, it's a good rule of thumb to have 3 to 4 experiences that you want to talk about in relation to the different skills and the different knowledge and expertise that you have. So maybe you want to have 3 to 5 experiences that you could discuss about your education at Lincoln Land. Maybe you'll have 3 to 5 experiences you want to talk about for your actual work experience or relevant experience to the job. Know what skills you want to highlight. Things like that, if you come in with those standard, I know I can go to these examples, that way you can customize that material no matter what type of question you get. Now, another key type of interviewing is behavioral-based interview questions, where this is really asking you to describe a situation and what occurred. So the technique I like talking about with students to navigate questions like this is the STAR technique, where you first clearly just start off explaining what was the situation. You tell us the task, what needed to be done, the action, so what did you actually do to resolve the issue, and then the result, what happened. So an example of this, if you were asked, tell me about a significant problem you solved, You want to give an example of something specific that you've actually done before, but especially focusing on the result is the most important piece of this. So an example response you could use would be something like, last semester I worked as a chef in the student-run restaurant at Lincoln Land, Bistro Verde. I was mainly responsible for preparing meals based on a set schedule, but after the first few weeks, I noticed that many guests were requesting customized meals to address dietary restrictions. I met with the supervisor of the restaurant to discuss a plan I had created to adjust meals to address these concerns. After offering the updated meals for a week, many guests shared positive feedback and further promoted our restaurant within the community. An example like this shows that you're identifying a very specific situation. You're able to customize what you are talking about in relation to what that employer asked. And then you are concisely identifying, here's what was going on, here's what I did, and here's how I had a positive impact. That is truly the key to ensuring that your interview responses remain on point while still thoroughly addressing the question being asked. They want to know, what did you do and what impact did it have? And how can you really discuss that in a concise manner? Most interview questions should take between 2 to 3 minutes to respond to. If you're moving beyond 3 minutes, likely you're either losing the attention of the employer or you're addressing information that's not incredibly relevant to the question that you were asked. The STAR technique, whenever you're asked a question that asks you to tell about a situation, an experience that you had, that really helps you navigate through that explanation in a concise manner. Okay. Other behavioral types of questions that you might encounter could include, tell me about a time when you took on a leadership position. You had to work with a difficult group or a difficult project. You made a mistake. You had to make an unpopular decision because you thought it was the right decision. Or you had to hold someone accountable for their actions. You'll see a lot of these are asking you to talk about potentially something that's negative or uncomfortable or that's something that was challenging. You may be asked that in an interview. And so again, having several experiences or examples prepared before you walk in the door, both positive and negative, is what's going to help you feel confident in responding to the variety of questions that you might encounter. And then also using the STAR technique for these types of questions will help you clearly identify what was going on in this situation, what you did, and still how you had a positive result. Now, the positive result might not be that you made the right choice or that it was an easy activity or experience, but instead it can be a reflection. So tell me about the time you made a mistake. You have to share something that you didn't do well, and that's okay. But again, going to that result piece, that what was the result, what actually happened, if you share how you made a mistake and then ultimately circle back to here's what I learned or here's what I did moving forward, that's still putting a positive spin on something that wasn't negative or that was negative initially. Okay, the most popular question that's asked in an interview that you should have a customized response prepared for is, tell me about yourself. This is the #1 question asked in interviews. And this truly sounds like a very open-ended question, right? Tell me about yourself. Well, what do you want to know? I could tell you a million things. What that employer is truly trying to get to know with this type of question is about your work experience, your education, and or possibly your skills related to the specific position. You do not want to share everything about your life in this type of response, but instead quickly highlight in 2 to 3 minutes your relevant education, experience, and skills for the position you are applying to. So you could respond with something like, I'm completing coursework in the electrical distribution lineman program at Lincoln Land Community College. I discovered my interest in becoming an electrical lineman after shadowing professionals in the field last summer. I learned even more while completing an apprenticeship with City Water, Light, and Power, where I developed a passion for persisting in challenging weather conditions to repair cables and restore electrical power. I know that your organization values competence and innovation, and I feel that my background and values would make me a great match for your team. So in this example, you can really see we're briefly highlighting educational experience, going a little bit into work or relevant experience and tying that to specific skills and tasks relevant to the job, and then really emphasizing, here's what I know your company's looking for, and that's why I think I'm a great match and I'm excited to be here today. If you follow that type of structure with your tell me about yourself response, you're able to quickly convey the key things they want to know about you while still emphasizing your knowledge and enthusiasm for the position you're applying to. Okay, so now that you've gone through the interview, you've finished your questions, it's time for you to ask questions of the employer. Now, this is one of the key opportunities that sometimes is missed in interviewing. The last question an employer will ask you is, do you have any questions for us? And unfortunately, a good amount of time people say, no, I don't. You've answered all my questions. Even if you've had a great conversation, it is essential that you still prepare 3 to 5 questions to ask that employer. It demonstrates that you truly are eager and interested in that position. It shows you've done your research and that you want to be actively involved in your role. So I suggest preparing 3 to 5 ahead of time. And that way, if a couple get answered while you're having a conversation in the interview, you still have some backup questions, because most likely you're only going to have time to ask 1 or 2 questions. So on the left of the screen, you can see I've highlighted some potentially strong questions to ask. So what professional development opportunities do you provide? You could also ask, what type of training would I receive in this position? Or how is your company different from a specific competitor you could identify? And you could even ask, what are the key skills an individual needs to be highly successful in this position? I like that one especially because it shows you are trying to go ahead and seek out knowledge that you can highlight of how you are qualified for that, or you're truly eager in doing a good job. That's also something you can highlight in your thank you email that you'll send afterwards, or thank you note, and we'll talk about that in just a minute. Things you want to avoid asking. Do not ask about salary during the interview. This is either already posted on the job posting or something that would be discussed once you are offered the position. This is typically not the time to ask about salary because you don't want to emphasize that that's your primary reason or motivator for the job. You want to avoid bad-mouthing anyone at this point too, or asking questions that have already been covered during the interview. Again, being engaged and attentive is key during the whole interview process. Also avoid just chewing gum, any other unprofessional or nervous habits as well. Okay, so after the interview, you're all done. It's time to go home, relax, breathe, but also within 24 hours, it is imperative that you send thank you letters, and you want to send one to all the key people that you interviewed with. So again, if it was just a one-on-one screening interview, you have one individual to send that thank you email or letter to. If you interviewed with a full panel, you want to be sure to send a thank you to every individual that was on that panel. So it can be good at the start of your interview, if you aren't familiar with everyone in the room, to ask for introductions and to have a pad of paper and a pen where you're jotting down names and titles so you can send the follow-up thank yous afterwards. Now, do you think it's ideal to send an email or handwritten note? In all honesty, both work. It truly depends on your specific situation. If you know they've shared that the interview is going to be resolved and they'll make a hiring decision quickly, email is probably ideal. And email is most common today. That way you know it will get to them quickly. At the same time, a handwritten note that you mail or drop off at the front office within a day, that could also send a strong impression that you've taken the time to write down and compose a thank you note. It shows you're genuine. It shows that you've given critical thought and effort into really following up on your interview experience. So it's truthfully your decision. And then finally, stay in touch. So it's also acceptable if we go back to questions to ask. If it's not already been answered during the interview, you can ask about next steps too as one of your final questions. And that way, when you're trying to stay in touch, if they tell you we'll be making a decision in a week, and a week goes on and you haven't heard for a few days after that, it might be reasonable to reach out at that point and just say, hey, I know you were planning on making a decision in about a week. I just wanted to touch base and see if you had any insight as to whether you might be making a hiring decision soon. It's also okay if you end up not getting the position to ask, would it be possible for you to keep me posted on any other future positions that might open with your company, because I'm truly eager to work here. And then last but not least, that kind of ties into self-assessment. I think it's especially important after an interview and after you take those 24 hours to walk away from it, to really take some time to reflect on your experience and your abilities during the interview. Are there things that you know you did especially well that you want to keep note of? Or, most importantly, what can you improve? If you felt that you didn't have great eye contact, you might want to do another mock interview with someone. If there was specific questions that you kind of stumbled through or didn't have a strong answer to, how can you reflect on ways to strengthen that moving forward? So taking time to really do that self-reflection piece is key with interviewing as well. All right. Last but not least, a few quick tips about key strategies for being successful during the interview. So it is important to continually emphasize your key strengths, your key skills, your key qualifications in relation to the position. I cannot emphasize enough that moving from vague, generalized questions to specific answers where you give concrete examples of your skills, your qualifications, your experience to a specific position is what will set you apart from other candidates. Making sure you arrive on time. Arriving on time means you are 10 minutes early typically. It is not walking in the door the minute that your interview is supposed to begin. It's being on time and prepared ahead of time in case that interviewer comes out and is ready to meet with you a few moments early. Because of that, if you're going somewhere, you're doing an on-site interview of a place that you have never been before, I'd do a test drive. Before I came and interviewed at Lincoln Land, I went and took the time to drive to campus because I live in Bloomington, and I wanted to make sure I knew exactly how long it would take me to get there, and I also knew exactly where I was going. So making sure that you take the initiative and you take the steps necessary to arrive on time is key. Sending that thank you note, again, this is one of the things that often sets people apart from other candidates. If you have two really strong candidates based on interviews, and one of them sends a thank you note, that might be the factor that leads to them deciding to hire you specifically. So sending a thank you note, and we'll talk about this more in class next time. Maintaining good eye contact, but not staring, okay? We don't want someone that glares at you the entire time, but showing that you're confident, you're willing to make eye contact, especially in a panel, making sure that you're addressing everyone in the room and not just one person is key as well. And then smiling frequently, looking like you're genuinely interested and that you're attentive during the interview is very important. And last but not least, practice, practice, practice. Again, I can't emphasize this. Nothing beats actual experience with interviewing. The more interviews or practice interviews you do, the more confident you're going to feel, and ultimately that leads to better interviewing. Okay, that's all the content for our online lesson. We'll pick up with a further discussion about interviewing in class. So I'm looking forward to seeing all of you next time.